Be Me Elizabeth, founder and CEO of my own marketing agency, Empower Creative. Not just any agency, mind you. This was my vision, my creation. A place built on principle. The principle was simple: to create a space where women could thrive, free from the usual corporate boys club nonsense. We were a women-forward agency. My mission statement, plastered on our beautifully minimalist website, was all about uplifting and mentoring female talent to shatter the glass ceiling. And it was working. We were winning awards, getting noticed. I felt like I was actually changing the industry from the inside out. Our office was open plan, full of natural light, plants, and driven, ambitious women. The energy was collaborative, supportive. Or so I thought. There was one exception to our all-female hiring push: Adrian. He was a holdover from the very beginning, before Empower Creative was even a name. Back when it was just me, a laptop, and a mountain of debt in a tiny co-working space. Adrian was the first person I hired. He was a project manager, quiet, efficient, almost unnervingly competent. He wasn't like the other guys I'd worked with in my past corporate life. No loud bragging, no sleazy jokes, no trying to talk over me in meetings. He just put his head down and did the work. And he was brilliant at it. He could untangle the most chaotic projects and make them run like clockwork. In the early days, we were a team. We worked late nights fueled by cheap coffee, building this thing from nothing. I couldn't have done it without him. I knew that. But as the company grew, my vision became clearer. I started hiring more and more women, brilliant, talented women who had been overlooked by other companies. The culture shifted. It became my women-forward dream. And Adrian, he just kind of faded into the background. He was still the bedrock of the company, the guy who managed our biggest, most important accounts, the one everyone went to when something was on fire. But he wasn't part of the new vision. He was just there. A necessary cog in a machine that was now decorated with a fierce feminist ideology. My star protege was a young woman named Claire. She was sharp, ambitious, and she completely bought into the Empower Creative ethos. I saw myself in her. I poured all my mentorship energy into Claire. I took her to networking events, gave her the lead on exciting new projects, and praised her publicly at every opportunity. The problem was, Claire was still green. Her ambition often outpaced her actual skill. She'd make mistakes, overpromise to clients, miss crucial details in a project scope, create timelines that were completely unrealistic. And every time, Adrian would quietly fix it. I knew it was happening, of course. I'd see the late-night email chains, Adrian logging on over the weekend to rework a budget or rebuild a presentation deck that Claire had messed up. He never complained. He never came to me to point out her errors. He just fixed them. And in a way, that made it easy for me to ignore. My narrative was that Claire was a rising star. Adrian's silent, thankless work allowed that narrative to continue without any inconvenient punctures from reality. He was enabling my vision, just not in the way I ever acknowledged. The breaking point started to build a few months back. We had our biggest client, a massive tech firm that accounted for nearly 40% of our annual revenue. This account was Adrian's baby. He had landed them, nurtured the relationship, and managed every single one of their campaigns flawlessly for 3 years. The client loved him. They trusted him. Their lead contact would often bypass everyone else and just call Adrian directly. A new massive project came down the pipeline from them. A complete brand relaunch. It was huge. In our weekly leadership meeting, I made the grand announcement. "This is the perfect opportunity for Claire to step up and lead a flagship account," I declared to the team. I remember the look on Adrian's face. It wasn't angry, it was just blank. A quiet erasure of emotion. He just nodded slowly. "I'll support her in any way she needs." That's all he ever said. The next 6 weeks were a slow-motion disaster. Claire was in over her head, and she was too proud to admit it. The client's calls became more frequent, more agitated. Deadlines were being missed. The quality of the work was sloppy. I kept running interference, assuring the client that this was just part of the creative process and that Claire was doing a phenomenal job. Behind the scenes, Adrian was working 80-hour weeks. I'd come into the office in the morning and find him asleep at his desk for the third time that week. He was redoing everything. The market analysis, the media plan, the creative concepts. He was basically doing two jobs, his own and the one I had given to Claire. The final presentation to the client's board was scheduled for a Friday. On Thursday evening, I walked past Claire's desk. She was staring at her screen, tears silently streaming down her face. The presentation deck was a mess. It was incoherent. The data was wrong. It looked like a student project. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a missed deadline. This could sink the company. I didn't say anything to Claire. I just went to my office and closed the door, my mind racing. What was I going to do? Postpone the meeting? That would look terrible. Admit that my star pupil had failed? Unthinkable. It would undermine everything I was building. Around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was an email from Adrian. Subject, final presentation deck for tomorrow. I opened it. It was perfect, a work of art. The data was visualized beautifully. The strategy was sharp and insightful. The narrative was compelling. He had completely rebuilt it from scratch, probably in the last 5 or 6 hours. He had saved us. He had saved me. The next morning, we were all in the big boardroom. The client's executive team was dialed in on the video call. I stood up to kick things off. And then I made the decision that I'd come to regret more than anything else in my life. I looked at the team, at Claire's nervous face, at Adrian's tired, stoic expression, and I began to speak. I talked about our agency's mission, about empowering the next generation of female leaders. I told the client's board how this project was a testament to that mission. I want to give a special thank you to the person who led this charge with such vision and tenacity, I said, my voice full of pride. Claire, your leadership on this has been truly transformative. You have delivered one of the best strategic plans I have ever seen. The whole room applauded. Claire flushed with a mixture of relief and what I now realize was probably shame. I glanced at Adrian. He was just looking at his notepad. No expression, nothing. And then, to add insult to injury, I said it. And a big thanks to Adrian as well for his technical support on the deck. It's so important for men to learn how to be effective allies and support female leadership. Great job. Technical support. I had reduced his Herculean effort, his saving of the entire company, to technical support. I framed his competence as a subservient function to a woman who had nearly sunk the project. The client was thrilled with the presentation. They approved the budget on the spot. After the call, the office was buzzing. People were congratulating Claire, who was accepting the praise with an awkward smile. I felt a surge of triumph. My vision was working. I had willed it into existence. A woman had led, and we had succeeded. The messy details didn't matter. Adrian quietly packed his briefcase and left for the day without saying a word to anyone. That should have been a red flag, but I was too high on my own narrative to see it. The following week was business as usual, or so it seemed. Adrian was even quieter than normal. He did his work, attended meetings, and left at 5 p.m. on the dot every day. The late nights stopped, the weekend logins ceased. I told myself he was just catching up on rest. He deserved it, after all his support. Then, about 2 weeks later, I got the calendar invite. Meeting from Adrian, just that one word. It was for the end of the day. I accepted, a little annoyed at the vague subject line. He walked into my office, closed the door, and sat down. He looked calm. Too calm. "Elizabeth," he began, his voice even and steady. "I'm resigning. I've accepted a position at another agency." I was floored, not because I thought he was irreplaceable, but because of the sheer audacity. How dare he, after everything I'd done? "I see," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "And where are you going?" "Apex Marketing," he said. I almost laughed. Apex. The agency was run by this old-school guy, Archer. Apex was everything I had defined my company against. It was a traditional, top-down, male-dominated corporate machine. A dinosaur. "Apex," I said with a smirk. "Well, I'm sure you'll be very comfortable there, back in your element." The jab didn't land. He didn't even flinch. "My last day will be in 2 weeks," he said, sliding a formal resignation letter across my desk. "Fine," I snapped. "Honestly, Adrian, this is probably for the best. We're moving in a very specific direction here, and frankly, I don't think you were ever a great fit for the new culture." I was trying to hurt him, to make him feel like he was the one being rejected, that he was the one who didn't measure up. It was a petty defensive reaction. The company is about empowering women, I continued, unable to stop myself. We need people who are fully committed to that mission, not just clocking in and out. He just looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was pity. He stood up. I wish you the best, Elizabeth. You built something amazing here. I hope it continues to succeed. And then he walked out. I sat there, fuming. The nerve of him. Wishing me well. The condescension. I immediately called a full team meeting. I announced Adrian's departure with a kind of triumphant energy. This is a good thing, I told them. It's an opportunity for us to become even more aligned with our core values. It opens up space for more female leaders to rise. I told them Claire would be officially taking over the big tech account, effective immediately. No one seemed to notice the irony that she had already been leading it for weeks. The 2 weeks of Adrian's notice period were strange. He was a ghost. He spent the entire time documenting his projects, creating handover files, and quietly answering people's questions. He was professional to a fault. On his last day, a few of the older employees took him out for a quiet lunch. Claire and the newer hires, my empowered team, barely acknowledged his departure. He came to my office at the end of the day to hand in his laptop and keycard. Good luck with everything, Adrian, I said, not looking up from my screen. You too, Elizabeth, he said. And then he was gone. I felt a sense of relief, cleansing. The last relic of the old way was gone. Now, Empower Creative could truly be the matriarchy I had envisioned. I was so wrong. I was so catastrophically wrong. The first crack appeared about a week later. It was a small thing. A software license for a critical piece of analytics software had expired, the one Adrian always handled. No one knew the password. No one knew the procurement process. The entire analytics team was dead in the water for 2 days while we scrambled to figure it out. Then a client, a mid-sized e-commerce brand, called to complain. Their monthly performance report was a week late. It was a report that Adrian used to generate automatically with a complex set of scripts he had written himself. No one even knew the scripts existed. We had to try and recreate the report manually, and it was full of errors. It felt like we were finding little traps he'd left behind, but they weren't traps. They were just the invisible systems he had built over the years to make everything run smoothly. The institutional knowledge that had just walked out the door. Claire was struggling with the big tech client. Without Adrian to secretly clean up her messes, her inexperience was on full display. The client's calls to me became daily. They were polite but firm. Things were slipping. The strategic direction was fuzzy. The execution was sloppy. I kept reassuring them, kept telling them Claire was getting up to speed. I even hired 2 new junior female project managers to support her. I was trying to solve a problem of competence by throwing more ideology at it. I was trying to replace one Adrian with 3 people who, combined, didn't have half his skill. The atmosphere in the office started to change. The confident, collaborative energy began to curdle into stress and panic. People were working late, not out of passion, but out of desperation. They were trying to plug the countless small holes that had appeared in the ship's hull now that our best engineer was gone. I started hearing whispers, people talking in the kitchen when they thought I wasn't around. I don't know how Adrian did all this. Claire asked me how to calculate ROI yesterday. I'm serious. This whole project has been a mess since Adrian left. I ignored it. I told myself it was just growing pains. I doubled down. I wrote a blog post for our company website about the importance of letting women lead, even if they make mistakes. I framed the chaos as a necessary part of dismantling patriarchal structures. It was self-aggrandizing nonsense, and a part of me knew it even as I was typing it. About a month after Adrian left, I was at an industry awards dinner. I was there to accept an award for Most Progressive Agency Culture. The irony was thick enough to choke on. As I was schmoozing, I saw him across the room. Archer, the CEO of Apex Marketing. He was holding court, laughing with a group of executives from some of the biggest brands in the country. He looked like a shark, confident, powerful, completely at ease. He caught my eye and gave me a small, unreadable smile before turning back to his conversation. It sent a shiver down my spine. The next morning, the real bomb dropped. I got an email. It was from our main contact at the big tech firm. The subject line was formal notice. My heart hammered in my chest as I opened it. It was a short, brutally professional letter. It stated that due to the significant and sustained drop in performance and strategic oversight since Adrian's departure, they were terminating their contract with us, effective in 30 days. It also mentioned that they had been approached by Apex Marketing with a new proposal, a proposal presented to them by their new lead strategist, Adrian. I read the email 3 times. I couldn't breathe. 40% of our revenue, gone, just like that. But it was worse than that. It was the reason. They didn't just leave. They left and went directly to him. They weren't loyal to Empower Creative. They were loyal to Adrian. All this time, I thought he was working for me. In reality, we had been working for him. His talent, his relationships were the asset. My company was just the vehicle, and I had handed that asset, gift-wrapped, to my biggest competitor. I felt a wave of nausea. I stumbled out of my office. The happy, buzzing workplace I had curated felt like a mockery. All these brilliant women I had hired, none of them could do what he did. I had built a temple to my own ideology, and in doing so, I had kicked out the one person who was actually holding up the roof. And now, the whole thing was about to come crashing down on my head. Be me, sitting in my glass-walled office. The award for Most Progressive Agency Culture is sitting on my shelf, mocking me. I read the termination email from our biggest client for the 4th, then 5th time. The words didn't change. Significant and sustained drop in performance. Contract terminated. New proposal from Apex Marketing. Presented by Adrian. The nausea I felt earlier turned into a cold, sharp panic that settled deep in my bones. This wasn't just a setback. This was an extinction-level event. My first instinct was to hide it, to pretend everything was fine while I desperately tried to fix it behind the scenes. But how do you hide a 40% hole in your revenue? How do you hide the loss of the client that gave you legitimacy? You can't. I had to tell the team. I called an emergency all-hands meeting in the main conference room. The mood was already tense. People could feel the stress radiating off me for the past month. They all filed in, looking at me with worried eyes. My empowered team. I stood at the head of the table, the termination email open on my laptop, a death sentence glowing on the screen. I have some difficult news, I started, my voice tight. Our biggest client has decided to terminate their contract. A collective gasp went through the room. People looked at each other in disbelief. Why? Someone asked. They felt that the quality of work had declined recently, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. And they have decided to move their business to Apex Marketing. I left out the part about Adrian. I didn't need to say it. Every single person in that room knew exactly what had happened. They knew who had been the glue holding that account together. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Claire burst into tears, loud, racking sobs. "It's my fault," she cried. "I couldn't handle it. I tried, but I couldn't." Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another colder part of me just felt a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. It was her fault, but it was my fault for putting her in that position. I had set her up to fail, and in doing so, I had set us all up to fail. "It's not your fault, Claire," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's a collective responsibility." But it wasn't. It was mine, my ideology, my blindness, my ego. The meeting ended with a vague, unconvincing speech from me about tightening our belts and focusing on our other amazing clients. No one bought it. The fear in the room was palpable. The fallout was immediate and brutal. News travels fast in our industry. Within 48 hours, it felt like everyone knew we had lost our flagship account to Apex. The story going around wasn't the one I would have written. It wasn't about a plucky feminist agency getting bullied by a corporate giant. The narrative was much simpler and much more damning. Empower Creative had pushed out its most valuable employee, and he had taken their biggest client with him. It painted me as an idiot, a manager so blinded by politics that she couldn't recognize her own top talent, because that's exactly what I was. Our other clients started getting nervous. I got a call from our second biggest client, a fashion brand we'd worked with for years. "Elizabeth, just heard the news," the marketing director said, his voice laced with false sympathy. "Everything okay over there?" "Everything is fine," I lied. "We're just restructuring a bit to focus on our core strengths." "Right," he said, unconvinced. Listen, could you send me over the performance metrics for our last quarter campaign, the full raw data files? He had never asked for the raw data before. He had always trusted Adrian's summary reports. He didn't trust us anymore. He was checking our work. The requests started pouring in from other clients too. More scrutiny, more questions, more micromanagement. They could smell the blood in the water. Internally, the company culture I had so carefully crafted disintegrated overnight. The supportive, collaborative environment vanished, replaced by a toxic soup of fear, blame, and paranoia. People started pointing fingers. Claire was an easy target. She was ostracized, eating lunch alone at her desk every day. The very women who had praised her leadership a month ago now whispered about her incompetence behind her back. So much for sisterhood. Then the resignation started. The first to go was our head of digital media. She was one of my key hires, a woman I had personally poached from a larger agency. She sent me a brief email on a Tuesday morning. She had an offer from a more stable company. She didn't even have the decency to tell me in person. A week later, 2 of my best graphic designers left. Then a senior copywriter. It was a slow, agonizing bleed. The most talented, most experienced people were the first to jump ship. They knew a sinking vessel when they saw one. They weren't loyal to my mission. They were loyal to their mortgages. All my talk about creating a safe space for women meant nothing when the paychecks were at risk. I tried to stem the bleeding. I called another all-hands meeting and offered bonuses, promotions, anything to make people stay. I looked out at their faces, and I saw nothing but skepticism. They knew the company was broke. My promises were empty. The financial reality was a nightmare. I spent my days in meetings with our accountant, trying to figure out a path forward. There wasn't one. With 40% of our revenue gone and our client list shrinking by the week, we were hemorrhaging money. We couldn't make payroll in 3 months' time, maybe 2. You have to downsize, Elizabeth, the accountant told me, his face grim. Drastically, and now. So I did. I had to lay off nearly half of my staff. I sat in the conference room, the same one where I had celebrated our wins, and one by one, I called in the women I had promised to empower. I told them their positions were being eliminated. I saw the betrayal in their eyes, the shock, the anger. One of them, a young social media manager I had mentored, looked at me and said, "I believed in what you were doing here. I thought this place was different." "I did too," I whispered as she walked out of the room. The layoffs were a bloodbath. The office, once so vibrant and full of energy, became a ghost town. The empty desks were like tombstones. Claire was one of the people I had to let go. It was a mercy, really. She was a shell of her former self, racked with guilt and anxiety. She cried when I told her, but it felt more like relief than sadness. "I'm sorry, Elizabeth," she said. "No," I replied, my voice hollow. "I'm the one who's sorry. I did this to you." And I meant it. I had taken this bright, ambitious young woman and thrown her into a situation she was not equipped to handle, all to serve my own ego. I had ruined her confidence. And for what? To prove a point that wasn't even true. The company limped on for another few months, a shadow of its former self. I tried to hustle for new business, but my reputation was shot. I'd walk into pitch meetings, and I could see it in their eyes. They'd read the articles, they'd heard the gossip. I was the feminist CEO who drove her own company into the ground because she wouldn't promote a man. It was a caricature, but it was close enough to the truth to be lethal. No one wanted to work with us. We were a liability, a joke. The day I finally decided to close the doors was quiet. There were only 6 of us left. I gathered them in the kitchen area and told them it was over. There was no big emotional scene, just a tired, resigned sadness. We spent the rest of the week packing up the office. I took down the awards from the shelf. The most progressive agency culture plaque felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I threw it in the trash. On the final day, I was the last one left. I walked through the empty office, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the floor. All my dreams, all my ambitions, all my righteous certainty. It had all turned to dust. I had built a beautiful house of cards on a foundation of hypocrisy, and a single quiet man had brought it all down just by walking away. The months that followed were a blur. Liquidation proceedings, angry calls from creditors, the slow, humiliating process of dismantling my life's work. I was a pariah in the industry. No one would hire me. I ended up taking on some freelance writing work just to pay the rent. I worked from my small apartment, a world away from the bright, airy office I had once commanded. I stopped reading the industry news. It was too painful. I didn't want to hear about Apex Marketing's success. I didn't want to hear about Archer's latest triumph. And most of all, I didn't want to hear about Adrian. But you can't avoid it forever. About 6 months after I closed the company, I was waiting in line at a coffee shop. I glanced at the tablet of the person in front of me. They were reading a major business journal's website. And there, on the front page, was a face I recognized. It was Adrian. He was older, a little more confident in the photo, but it was him. He was standing next to Archer, both of them smiling, shaking hands in front of a massive new corporate headquarters. The headline was, "What Stopped My Heart." Apex Marketing, named Agency of the Decade following landmark tech merger. The architect of the deal, lead strategist Adrian. My hands started to shake. I bought my coffee and sat down at a small table, pulling out my own phone. I found the article. It detailed Apex's meteoric rise over the past year. They had landed client after client. Their growth was explosive. The article credited this turnaround to a new strategic direction implemented by Adrian. It talked about his innovative approach to client management, his uncanny ability to solve complex problems, his quiet, results-driven leadership. Then I got to the quote from Archer. The interviewer had asked him the secret to his success. "I don't play politics," Archer said. "I don't care about gender or ideology or what's trending on social media. I care about one thing, talent. The day I hired Adrian, I knew I had found the best talent in the business. My only job was to give him the resources he needed and then get out of his way. He's not a male strategist. He's a brilliant strategist, and that's all that matters." I put my phone down on the table. The coffee was cold. That was it. That was the whole lesson. It was so simple, so painfully obvious. I had spent years building a business around an identity. We are women. We are feminists. We are progressive. I was so obsessed with the who that I had completely lost sight of the what, the work, the results, the talent. Adrian was never the problem. He was never a threat to my vision. He was the one quietly, thanklessly making that vision possible. My crusade against toxic masculinity had made me so paranoid that I saw it everywhere. I saw his quiet competence not as a strength, but as a silent judgment. I saw his lack of need for praise not as humility, but as a sign that he wasn't a team player. I had projected a whole host of villainous, patriarchal traits onto a man who was, in reality, the most loyal, dedicated, and professional person I had ever worked with. He wasn't the dinosaur, I was. I was the one stuck in a rigid ideological past, unable to see the person right in front of me. I hadn't built a progressive utopia. I had built a cult of personality, with me as the high priestess. And the moment a true test came, the entire faith collapsed because it was built on nothing but hot air. I sat in that coffee shop for a long time. I thought about that final meeting, where I had patronizingly thanked him for his technical support. The humiliation of that moment wasn't his. It was mine. I had the best talent in the business right under my nose, and I had thrown him away with a condescending smile because he didn't fit my narrative. He didn't go out and seek revenge. He didn't need to. He just went somewhere he was valued for his work, and he succeeded. His success was my failure. The market had simply corrected my mistake. I finished my cold coffee and walked out into the street. The world hadn't changed. Business was still business. I was the one who had been living in a fantasy. I didn't know what I was going to do next. My career was in ruins, my reputation was gone, but for the first time in a very long time, I saw things clearly. I had been so busy trying to fight a phantom patriarchy that I had become the toxic boss myself. And in the end, I was the only one who paid the price.